is going on, Solo fam? My name is John Solo, and welcome to another episode of Messed Up Origins, the show where we shed light on the truly messed up history of some of your favorite childhood stories. Last episode, we broke down Humpty Dumpty, pun intended, and I asked you guys if I should make Fables Explained a regular thing. Your response was an overwhelming yes, so today we're diving into the history of another famous nursery rhyme. Can you believe it? First there was Disney Explained, then there was Crypt Fables Explained, and now there's Fables Explained. Who would have thought that one day we would have 3 messed up series? I'm pretty excited about that, and also a dork, so for today's episode, I chose a story where the number 3 was a recurring theme, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Get excited, because today's installment is gonna be like no other. After we do our quickie review of the modern day version, we have not 1, not 2, but you guessed it, 3 other versions to break down, and each one is messed up in its own special way. Before we get started, I'm gonna ask the Solo fam to do what you guys do best and smash that like button with all your heart. Last week's episode, I set the week's goal to 7,000 likes, and you guys got to over 10,000 likes in less than 2 days. So let's see if we can do that again. Also, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to be notified about new messed up content coming to your sub box every week. Although there's been several different versions of the Goldilocks story over the past few centuries, the one that we're all familiar with hasn't really changed in quite some time. It starts with a little girl named Goldilocks going for a walk in the forest and discovering a house. After she knocks and no one answers, she just lets herself in because she has no manners or sense of privacy. She sees 3 bowls of porridge on the dinner table and tries each one. The first one is too hot, the second is too cold, but the third is just right. So she eats it all. After finishing the food that wasn't hers, Goldilocks decides that she needs a rest and sits down in the great big chair that she finds in the next room. Only that chair was too big, so she tried the next one, and that one was too big too. Just like the porridge, her third option was just right for her, but after she settled down into it, it broke into pieces. She goes upstairs to find a new place to rest and discovers 3 beds. The first one is too hard, the second is too soft, but the third, say it with me, is just right. Goldilocks gets so comfy in the bed that she passes out and doesn't hear the owners of the house walk in and discover their home's been vandalized and their food's been eaten. They look around the first floor and continue their investigation upstairs to find Goldilocks fast asleep in Baby Bear's bed. At that very moment, she wakes up to see Mama and Papa Bear staring right at her. And naturally, she responds by screaming at the top of her lungs, running out of the house, and never bothering them again. So that is how most people today know the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. But there have been many changes made to that story since its inception back in the 1700s. And like most of the stories we cover on this show, the history of Goldilocks is complicated. So we're gonna go one step at a time, back in time to 1837, when the story was published for the very first time. The first man to receive credit for putting this fable on paper was Robert Southey, an English poet and author who included it in his collection of stories called The Doctor, which he initially published anonymously. Now his version actually is not the most messed up that we'll be talking about today, but it's an important chapter of the Goldilocks legacy, and there's a few details that are unique to it, so it's worth us going over. Unlike the modern day tale, Southey's version opens up from the bear's perspective. They've just made themselves a nice porridge breakfast and decided to go out for a walk while it cools down. Also, unlike the modern tale, these 3 bears are not related. Instead of Papa, Mama, and Baby Bear, it's Great Huge Bear, Middle-Sized Bear, and Little Small Wee Bear. Needless to say, I'm gonna be abbreviating those. While the roommates were out on their walk, a little old woman came creeping up to their house, and Southey emphasizes that she could not have been a good or honest old woman because she first looked through the windows to make sure the bears weren't home, and then she just opened the door. So instead of the intruder character being an innocent little girl with beautiful golden hair, Southey had first written her as a dishonest old woman. The events that follow after she lets herself in the house are basically the same as the story we all know. The biggest difference is whenever this old lady tries something she doesn't like, whether it's the cold porridge or the hard chair, she says a bad or wicked word about it. Yeah, in place of Goldilocks, we have an old hag who constantly swears. Isn't that nice? Anyways, she eats the little bear's food, breaks his chair, and passes out in his bed. When the bears return home soon after, they are furious when they discover someone's broken in, and when they go upstairs, they find that rude old woman sleeping soundly. You might think she would have woken up from the bear's angry roars, but that didn't faze her. When the big bear roared, she heard him in her dream as the sound of thunder. When the middle bear did the same, she heard him as the sound of a human talking. It wasn't until the little bear chimed in with his sharp, high-pitched roar that the woman was finally jolted awake, and after realizing she was surrounded by 3 bears, she proceeded to scream and jump out the window. As for what happened to her after, we'll never know, because when the bears looked out the window to see where she landed, she had already disappeared into the forest and they never saw her again. Now that that, ladies and gentlemen, was the first version of the story to ever be published and reproduced. But the fable didn't gain its famous reputation right away. It didn't receive any special attention until later that same year when another author named George Nichol republished the story in his own book, which was better suited for children, and credited Southey as the original author. And then in 1848 it was republished again, this time with illustrations, and its place as a classic children's tale was solidified. But we're not done yet. There's two more versions of the story I think you guys would really enjoy hearing, and what makes them especially fascinating is they both came before Southey's version. One common trait that a lot of these nursery rhymes seem to have is they originated as stories that were shared orally, whether as a bedtime story from a parent to a child or from one friend to another just as a way to pass the time. You might find this hard to believe, but originally Goldilocks was told as a scary story called The Three Bears. Now this wasn't always the case, and it would largely depend on the audience, but people found ways to make this supposed children's story scary. I would imagine they really put emphasis on the part where the intruder wakes up from her nap to find herself surrounded by a group of angry bears, kind of like how The Simpsons did it. You might also be surprised to hear there's one particular woman who became famous solely through being a loving aunt and sharing this story with her nephew. Her name was Eleanor Muir, and in 1831 she gave her nephew Horace Broke a handmade copy of the book with her own version of the story inside it. You'll notice from the year this was actually before Robert Southey's version was published in 1837. Like I said, he was the first person to have the story published and reproduced, but Eleanor actually beat him when it came to making it into a book. Only hers was a single copy and obviously meant as a very personal gift, not something to manufacture and make money off of. For the most part, the stories are pretty similar. Eleanor did go through the effort of versifying it, making it rhyme, and illustrating it, but when it comes to the events that take place, only some smaller details have been altered. For example, in Southey's version, the old woman has no motivation for getting into the bear's house. She's just rude. But in Muir's story, the old woman tried visiting the bears when they were home and they wouldn't let her in. She took that rejection very personally and decided she was going to see the inside of their house whether they wanted her to or not. The story proceeds exactly how you'd expect until the end when the bears return home. This woman actually doesn't even get to nap in the little bear's bed because after she laid on it, the bottom burst through, and when she got up, she saw the bears walking back through the window. Naturally, she was terrified, so she hid in the closet hoping the bears wouldn't find her, and she was forced to sit there and listen as they went room to room, getting angrier and angrier about the vandalism she caused. It wasn't long before the bears found her and took it upon themselves to punish their nosy neighbor. At first, they tried burning her alive, but for some reason she wouldn't burn. Then they tried drowning her, but she couldn't be drowned. So they took the old hag, who at this point was charred and soaking wet, and threw her on the steeple of St. Paul's Church, where she was impaled and left to die, while the bears had a dance party apparently. A pretty gruesome ending to a book that was supposed to be for her 4-year-old nephew's birthday, but one thing we've learned in this series is that people from back in the day had a very different definition of child appropriate. Honestly, I don't know if they even had the phrase. Regardless, the Goldilocks story, both Eleanor and Southey's versions, were commonly told to children around England, including Southey himself. It's widely believed that when he was young, Southey originally heard the story of the three bears from his uncle, only that version was different in one distinct way. The intruder character was a female fox named Scrapefoot. John, are you telling me that before Goldilocks was an innocent little girl, she was a conniving old lady, and before that she was a fox? How did that change happen? I'm glad you said something because that's actually what I wanted to mention next. What a coincidence. There's a theory out there that whenever Robert Southey first heard the story, he thought the word vixen was referring to a crafty old woman when really it was referring to a female fox. Others think he made the change on his own, but I prefer a combination of those theories. According to some witnesses, Robert Southey was overheard sharing the story with some friends in a public venue in 1813. I find it kind of hard to believe he was openly telling the story to people more than 18 years before his was published and he never got corrected. I'm more inclined to believe that at some point one of his buddies did correct him on it, but he still thought that an old lady character sounded better than a fox, which it really does. When it comes to differences in the Scrapefoot story, it's kind of hard to give specifics because we only have a rough idea of how it actually went, and that basically follows the Eleanor Muir version right up until the end. After the bears catch Scrapefoot and fail to burn her alive or drown her, instead of impaling her on a church steeple, they just threw her out a window. She survives the fall without breaking a single bone because she's an agile fox and decides she's never going near the bear's house again, and that's how the story ends. One thing I like about these nursery rhymes is unlike the Disney stories, which usually go from original version to Disney-fied, these stories slowly evolve. For example, the intruder character was a fox throughout Who knows how many decades this story was told, and then one guy confusing Vixen to mean old lady changes the story forever. Because if the character was never an old lady, the guy responsible for changing her to an innocent little girl in 1850, Joseph Kundal, might never have done it. His whole reason for the change was that in his opinion there was already enough stories about old women. He also made the decision to give his new character the name Silverhair because that's how a lot of people referred to her when she was an old lady. A few of her other names throughout the years include Silverhair, Silverlocks, Silverhair is one word, Goldenhair is two words, Silverhair again, Goldenlocks is one word, Little Goldenhair, and finally in 1904 her name was permanently changed to Goldilocks. Throughout that time, the fate of Goldilocks also changed. In some stories, after getting discovered, she just runs into the forest and is never seen again. In others, she's about to get eaten by the bears when her mom rescues her, and in others, she just gets eaten. And that, Solo fam, was every significant edition of the Goldilocks story that we know about, so now I want to hear your thoughts and which edition was your favorite. Personally, I liked Eleanor Muir's version the best because that ending was everything I love about these old stories. Excessively savage and out of nowhere. I had expected the bears to try and eat their intruder, not try and burn them alive or drown them, but guess I was wrong. If you enjoyed this episode of Messed Up Origins and want to help the series and Solo fam grow, make sure to smash that like button with all your heart so we can reach our goal of 10,000 likes by the end of the week. It's a bold goal, but I think you're up for the challenge. Also make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to be notified about new messed up content just like this being sent to your sub box every week. And of course, if you want to stay updated on Messed Up Origins news, what projects I'm working on next, or if you just want to chat, you can follow me on social media. I got the links in the description down below. Thank you all for watching, Solo fam. I'll be seeing you very soon. Until then, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.